Have you ever heard a tale so gripping it sent shivers down your spine with every shot fired? That's exactly what awaits you in this unforgettable saga of one woman's stand against ruthless outlaws in a frontier town. Imagine a dusty main street at high noon, guns drawn, hearts pounding, and in the center of it all, a solitary figure defying impossible odds. The tension crackles through each chapter, and trust me, you won't believe the twists until you've ridden all the way to the final showdown. Before you embark on this journey from despair to triumph, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support not only helps us bring you more incredible Western stories, it also lets us know we're doing something worthwhile. Buckle up for the ride and prepare to watch courage light a spark that could burn down the biggest tyrant's hold on a struggling town. They say there's a story carried on the desert wind that still makes folks hold their breath when dusk settles in. It's a story about greed and redemption, about how a quiet town nearly got crushed under the weight of one man's ambition, until an unassuming settler arrived and turned all expectations upside down. The place was called Canyon Falls, a huddle of weather-beaten buildings strung along a single, rutted street. No one ventured there expecting prosperity. The land was too dry for easy farming, and the local mines had supposedly run out of worthwhile ore ages ago. But as always in these parts, the surface hid more than the casual traveler could guess. Deep beneath that hard-packed earth, a silver vein glimmered with the promise of riches. Whispers said it was the purest silver for hundreds of miles, capable of making a lucky prospector fabulously wealthy, or striking him dead before the sun went down. For the longest time, the people of Canyon Falls went about their business with modest hopes. Families worked stubborn parcels of land, raising scraggly livestock and coaxing beans and corn from the hostile soil. The church door squeaked on its hinges, but rarely saw a traveling preacher. A sagging saloon named the Golden Bell did better trade than all other establishments combined, thanks mostly to the local ranch hands and drifters looking for a stiff drink to ease life's worries. Though the town had little, it also had peace, right up until the day Jericho Viper Sutherland rode in with his hired guns. Mayor Plummer, a portly man with sweaty palms, tried to stand firm at first, but Sutherland had a way of talking that slithered into a fellow's mind like a snake in tall grass. He offered to buy up parcels of land for a fraction of their value, slipping the mayor a little something on the side for his trouble. Those who refused to sell soon discovered that accidents came swiftly in Canyon Falls. Barns went up in flames at night, drifting embers lighting the sky while smoke choked the unsuspecting families. Or a cowhand would disappear, never to be seen again, replaced by rumors of shallow graves among the yucca and sage. The local lawman, Sheriff Claude Crockett, pretended to investigate, but deep down everyone knew he was dancing on Sutherland's payroll. All this cruelty reached a turning point one blistering summer morning in 1875 when Juliana Jules Armstrong rode into Canyon Falls. She wore a threadbare bonnet and guided a tired horse, pausing just long enough to get water from the public well. At first glance, she seemed like any other settler chasing scraps of luck in the desert. She picked out a plot of land north of town, arid and unforgiving, staked her claim, and started clearing brush with a determination that made onlookers scratch their heads. What could she possibly see in that dusty patch of nowhere? Mayor Plummer, fretting over a possible snag in Sutherland's grand plan, reported the newcomer's claim that very afternoon. Sutherland responded the way he always did, by dispatching men to make an offer. But something about Jules Armstrong didn't quite fit the mold of a timid homesteader. Word got back that she took their envelope of hush money without even glancing inside. She simply smiled in a way that made one deputy's knees wobble. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was the smile of someone who had faced far greater threats. From that day on, the quiet routine of Canyon Falls shifted. A subtle tension brewed, like the electric charge before a lightning strike, and everyone sensed that a showdown was coming, but few could have guessed how dramatically it would upend the town's fate, or reveal the dark secrets behind Sutherland's reign. By the time Jules made her second trip into Canyon Falls for supplies, folks were already whispering. She went to Harriet Neal's general store, Harriet being a keen-eyed widow who saw more than she let on, and purchased flour, salt, nails, and a few other essentials. Harriet noticed how Jules's gaze methodically swept the store, as though checking for threats. There was no wasted movement, no sign of the naive optimism typical of new settlers. Harriet tried to engage her in casual talk about the punishing drought and the sorry state of the local farmland. Jules responded politely enough, but Harriet picked up on the same subtle aura that had rattled the deputy. A tension coiled beneath Jules's calm surface, ready to strike if provoked. Not long after, Sutherland held a quiet meeting with Mayor Plummer in the back room of the Golden Bell Saloon. The thick, stale air reeked of whiskey and suspicion. Plummer stammered that they had tried the usual approach with the newcomer. Some money offered, a not-so-veiled threat tossed in. But Jules hadn't budged. Sutherland responded with a cold smirk, stroking the butt of the revolver at his hip. "She'll move." "They all do," he remarked, though beneath his assured tone, he sensed an unknown variable, like a flaw in a well-practiced card trick. To glean more information, Sutherland sent Wade Maxwell, his most skillful tracker, to observe Jules's homestead from a distance. Perched on a rocky outcrop north of town, Wade spent 3 days watching her routine. She rose at dawn, tended to a small patch of vegetables and a few scrawny chickens, then spent part of the afternoon riding her horse along the boundary of her land. This was typical pioneer work, yet something about her precise movements gave Wade a chill he couldn't shake. She seemed too practiced in the saddle, too attuned to the desert's silence. "She knows I'm here," he reported to Sutherland later, his voice uneasy. "Don't ask me how, but she knows." Meanwhile, Sheriff Crockett wrestled with the weight of his moral compromise. He'd once dreamed of upholding justice in the frontier, but Jericho Sutherland's silver had bought him and every principle he once held dear. Now, with each family that vanished or lost a home to sudden accidents, the badge Crockett wore felt heavier than the iron on his hip. When he heard rumors that Jules Armstrong was refusing Sutherland's terms, a brief flicker of admiration ignited in his weary heart. Admiration tempered by the knowledge of what such defiance usually earned in Canyon Falls. Then came the tragedy of the Reynolds family, who disappeared without a word. Their wagon turned up out by Boulder Pass, the horses gone, no footprints to explain where they went. Crockett mumbled something about raids or bandits, but Harriet Neal recognized a pattern. Families who wouldn't sell to Sutherland had a habit of simply vanishing. A single question began to swirl through the town like dust in the wind. Who might stand up to Jericho Sutherland and his men before more people disappeared? On the day Harriet confided these concerns to Jules, the temperature soared past 100 degrees, but a chill settled in Jules' gray eyes. She asked Harriet how many families had vanished or fled. "A dozen," Harriet answered softly, her voice quivering. The last place to go up in flames belonged to the Thompsons. The glow of the fire had painted the night sky red. Jules nodded once, as though Harriet's words confirmed something she already suspected. Later, Harriet would say that was the moment the town's luck began to turn. That same evening, Jules rode past Sutherland and his men near the saloon, her posture so unruffled that onlookers held their breath. When Sutherland spat a mocking greeting, she simply doffed her worn bonnet and replied with unnerving calm, "Don't fret about me. I know how to handle any storm rolling in." Humiliation in front of an audience can turn even a careful outlaw into a reckless one. Lucas Sutherland, Jericho's younger brother, learned this the hard way when he tried to harass Jules in broad daylight. She had been quietly leading her mare along the dusty main street, minding her own business, when Lucas sauntered up to her, reeking of cheap whiskey and stale sweat. He sneered, "Heard you're the stubborn type, miss. Why don't I show you how we do things in Canyon Falls?" Without warning, he reached for her bonnet. What followed happened so fast that half the bystanders couldn't be sure of the details. One moment, Lucas's hand was inches from her face. The next, he was on the ground, wailing in pain, his arm twisted at a grotesque angle. Jules hadn't seemed to move at all. The townspeople stood aghast. Lucas sputtered curses, but she just tipped her head and said, "I'm rather particular about personal space." Then she walked away, leaving him to gather what remained of his pride. Among those who witnessed the incident was Dougie Collins, a fresh-faced deputy whose starched badge gleamed like a new coin. He felt a thrill of awe at the fluid way she defended herself. No fuss, just lightning reflexes and an iron will. That night, Jericho Sutherland fumed in his makeshift camp on the outskirts of town. His campfire threw flickering shadows on the stony faces of his men, each lost in his own thought. Lucas sat with his injured arm in a makeshift sling, bitterness etched into every line of his face. "She humiliated me in front of half the town," he grumbled. "We ought to burn her place to the ground right now." Sutherland gritted his teeth, well aware that launching such a direct attack so soon would risk drawing the attention of federal marshals. He wasn't ready for that kind of heat. Instead, he demanded answers from Wade Maxwell and the others. Who exactly was Juliana Armstrong? Where had she come from? Why did she handle herself like a seasoned gunfighter? No one had conclusive answers, but rumors persisted of a figure from the war years. A ghostly sharpshooter with a knack for vanishing, rumored to be either a Union spy or a Confederate assassin, depending on who told the tale. Sutherland had dismissed it as campfire nonsense. Now he wondered if there was some truth behind the myth. If Jules was that legendary phantom, it explained her preternatural skill. None of this eased his anxieties. He resolved to gather more men, old acquaintances who owed him favors, to tighten his grip on Canyon Falls and see if Jules would bend or break. Meanwhile, Jules continued her silent campaign of observation. She frequented Harriet Neal's store, quietly asking about the fates of families who had vanished. She visited Dr. Morgan, the local physician, under the pretense of buying some remedy for a nagging cough, but more likely to glean any information about who had been injured by Sutherland's men. She crossed paths with Sheriff Crockett, who wore the badge as though it weighed 1,000 pounds on his chest. He tried once more to push her off her claim, handing her a new offer that Sutherland insisted she accept. Jules opened the envelope, studied the paltry sum within, and then handed it back with a shake of her head. "It isn't about the money," she said softly, a note of steel in her voice. "Might be you and Sutherland have grown too used to thinking people can be bought." Crockett mustered a feeble threat about accidents in these parts, but Jules responded with a half-smile that made his blood run cold. "Accidents do happen," she agreed, "but sometimes there's a higher law than any paper money can buy." With that, she left the sheriff to grapple with his own conscience. Had he looked in the mirror right then, he might have seen more than just his weary reflection. Maybe the shadow of a man who once believed in justice. Within days, Canyon Falls found itself pushed toward a tipping point. The Reynolds children, who had been missing for over a week, stumbled into town one morning, pale and trembling, but alive. They told a wild story of being held in a shack by two of Sutherland's men who'd boasted about teaching their folks a lesson. Then a mysterious figure appeared in the dead of night, wearing a dark hood and moving with uncanny speed. The kids never saw the figure's face, only the muzzle flash of a revolver and the sudden collapse of the outlaws who were guarding them. Dr. Morgan, who examined the children for cuts and bruises, relayed the tale to Harriet Neal, and inevitably, it spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, the parents, Jackson and Clara Reynolds, were nowhere to be found. Some said they too had been rescued and taken to a safer hideout. Others whispered it was all part of a bigger plan to undermine Sutherland's control. Rumors of a ghost rider or phantom guardian filled the saloon chatter. All eyes turned to Jules Armstrong, who was spotted calmly working on a fence outside her homestead the next day, as if she hadn't been anywhere near the Reynolds shack. Sheriff Crockett rode out to confront her, but she responded with placid politeness and no real answers. In the midst of this, Frank Quickdraw Tucker, one of Sutherland's top gunmen, ended up dead behind the Golden Bell Saloon, 2 bullet wounds in his chest and his own revolver still holstered. It happened so fast that not a single witness could say they saw the shooter. Dougie Collins was the first on the scene, and he confided to Harriet that the bullet grouping looked like the work of someone who knew their way around a revolver. Expertly placed shots, minimal fuss. Tongues wagged, calling it the same ghost that freed the Reynolds children. Sutherland lost it when he heard, shouting at his men that they needed to flush out this vigilante before more lives were lost. Jules's name came up again and again. Sutherland's men spoke of her in hushed tones, half out of fear she might be eavesdropping. One night, Wade Maxwell ventured a new angle. Maybe Jules wasn't alone. Maybe she was working with some shadowy network of outlaws or ex-soldiers. They all remembered the war stories, whispers of a legendary sharpshooter who'd slipped into Confederate encampments and freed Union prisoners, a woman credited with feats that defied belief. They'd called her the Phantom. Some insisted she was just a myth. Others swore she was real but must have perished long ago. Could Jules be that phantom made flesh? Still, Sutherland was a patient man, as cunning as he was ruthless. He summoned more reinforcements from the region's darker corners, rogues who didn't ask questions as long as the money was good. He put Lucas in charge of coordinating them, though Lucas's broken arm limited his ability to ride into the desert for recruitment. Despite his hostility toward Jewel, Lucas was forced to proceed more cautiously now that she'd proven so formidable. Amid all this unease, Harriet Neal found herself quietly organizing townspeople who had grown weary of living under constant threat. A blacksmith named Carter Milburn refused to service Sutherland's men. A rancher blocked them from watering horses at his well. Small acts of defiance, yes, but each one a chip in the imposing wall of fear Sutherland had built. Harriet asked Jules if she'd stand with the town if things turned bloody. Jewel, typically reserved, met Harriet's gaze and said simply, "If we don't stand together, we'll fall alone." That statement, repeated in hushed corners, became a rallying cry for the citizens of Canyon Falls. Tensions boiled over the day Dr. Morgan went missing. He was last seen late at night, lamp glowing in his clinic window as he tallied medical supplies. Come sunrise, his bed was empty, the sheets still warm. A note pinned to the door read, "Too late." The same flowing script rumored to have been left at the shack where the Reynolds children were freed. Lucas Sutherland, furious, led a group of men to the clinic, kicking in doors and overturning furniture. All they discovered were half-filled cups of cold coffee, indicating Dr. Morgan had vanished moments before they arrived. Jericho Sutherland reacted like a cornered animal. He gathered his closest men in a cramped hideout near the canyon rim. The flickering lantern light accentuated the grim lines of his face. "This so-called phantom is making fools of us," he snarled. "We must root out everyone who might be helping her. Who's been talking to her? Who's vanished? Dr. Morgan, the Reynolds family, old man Carter up by the ridge. Any of them could be in on it." When Wade Maxwell suggested that Jules herself might be orchestrating everything, Sutherland hammered his fist on the table. "Then we tear down her claim piece by piece until she's got no place left to hide." Canyon Falls felt the pressure of an impending showdown. Armed strangers appeared in the Golden Bell Saloon at odd hours, conferring in hushed voices, glancing over their shoulders. Harriet Neal, Harriet's shop assistant, and several other concerned neighbors began making plans for how to protect the vulnerable. Families with small children and the elderly. Dougie Collins approached Jules with a trembling sincerity, admitting that Sheriff Crockett refused to take any strong action. "He's too deep in Sutherland's pocket," Dougie confided, "but I can't just watch more good people vanish." Jules regarded him with a somber nod, as though acknowledging a soldier who'd found his courage too late. One morning, Jules cantered into town as if nothing were amiss, dismounting at Harriet Neal's store. Before she could step inside, Sheriff Crockett strode up to her, blotches of sweat marking his collar. "Dr. Morgan's gone," he spat. "You know anything about that?" Jules adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, letting the shadow obscure her expression. "Lots of folks go missing around here. Odd you're so focused on the wrong leads." Crockett stepped closer, trying to use his height as an intimidation tactic. "I sent a telegram to the territorial marshal. Funny thing, they never heard of Juliana Armstrong." Jules's lips curved into a humorless grin. "You expect them to keep tabs on every settler out here?" she asked. Before he could respond, commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Two of Sutherland's thugs had cornered Deputy Dougie Collins, accusing him of spying on their camp. Dougie's back pressed against the weathered wall, his deputy badge glinting in the harsh sunlight. The outlaws glared, guns half drawn. "Maybe we ought to give you a lesson about private property," sneered one, an angular man with a scar crisscrossing his jaw. Then came a blur of movement. Jules stepped between Dougie and the attackers. Almost too fast to see, her hands flicked out from beneath her coat, glints of silver flashing in the sun. One thug yelped as a throwing knife lodged in his gun hand. The other looked down in shock at a blade pinning his sleeve to the saloon's wooden siding. The entire street went quiet as Jules stood there, stance wide, eyes cold as a winter sky. "Interesting behavior for a homesteader," Crockett muttered, swallowing hard. Jules shrugged. "Interesting that you side with men like these, Sheriff," she retorted, her voice carrying an undercurrent of scorn. Jericho Sutherland arrived on horseback with half a dozen riders, the thundering hooves echoing like distant gunfire. He reined in just short of Jules and the pinned outlaws, surveying the scene with narrowed eyes. "You're meddling in affairs above your station, Ms. Armstrong," he said, his voice low and lethal. "You've assaulted my men, interfered with my business, and stirred up trouble that could cost more lives than you know." Jules slid a sidelong glance at him, unruffled. "I'd say people were already dying long before I showed up," she responded. A hush swept the street as onlookers, shopkeepers, ranchers, housewives peering from behind shutters, realized a final confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when. Sheriff Crockett hovered nearby, looking torn. He fingered the gold watch chain Sutherland had given him, his mind spinning with the price of betrayal. But he stood frozen, overshadowed by Sutherland's men, all itching for an excuse to shoot. Harriet Neal and Carter Milburn watched from the boardwalk, shifting their weight from foot to foot, torn between fear and a growing resolve. Sutherland sneered, "Look around, Ms. Armstrong. I own this town, every sagging plank and dusty trail. Even if you are who I suspect you are, you're just one person. So here's my final offer. Take the money, ride out, and let Canyon Falls remain under my protection. Otherwise," he tapped the revolver on his hip, "you won't see another sunset." For a long beat, Jules said nothing. Then she lifted a hand to her bonnet and slowly took it off, revealing close-cropped hair gone prematurely silver. A ragged scar traced her jawline, and her eyes reflected too many memories of war to be easily shaken. A collective gasp flitted through the crowd. Harriet Neal dropped her hand to her shotgun, mouth slightly open at the recognition. Dougie Collins felt goosebumps crawl down his arms. Even the hardest of Sutherland's men shifted uneasily in their saddles as though glimpsing a ghost. "I've been called many names," Jules said, voice as cool as a desert breeze at dusk. "Some folks called me the Phantom, others the Ghost Rider, back in the war. But right now, Sutherland, you can just call me Justice." If Sutherland had any doubt left that she was the rumored sharpshooter from half-whispered Civil War legends, that doubt died in the brightness of her unwavering stare. To everyone's shock, Harriet Neal stepped forward, shotgun cradled. "She's not alone," Harriet declared, her voice tremulous but resolute. "Canyon Falls is done being pushed around." One by one, townspeople emerged from hiding. Carter Milburn, the blacksmith, a pair of ranch hands who had quietly formed a night watch, older kids who'd banded together to run errands for Harriet. Faces tight with fear, but fueled by collective outrage. Sutherland's lip curled at the sight. "What's the plan?" he mocked. "A handful of farmers and shopkeepers, armed with pitchforks and birdshot, trying to take down me and my men? You've clearly lost your senses." Jules's gaze swept the gathering, meeting each set of eyes in turn. "They don't have to take you down, Sutherland," she said, voice carrying through the tense air. "This ends between you and me, right here, right now." Sheriff Crockett attempted to step in, words lost in his throat, but Harriet Neal's defiant stance with her shotgun lifted the final veil of secrecy. The townspeople had found their line in the sand. Sutherland, cornered but still formidable, sneered. "Fine. At sundown we settle this. My men against whatever ghost army you've mustered." Jules shook her head, a grim smile shaping her lips. "We're settling it now," she said. Sutherland's eyes flickered with rage, but beneath that was genuine apprehension. The war for Canyon Falls had truly begun. As if the desert itself sensed impending bloodshed, thunder rumbled from distant mountains, a portent of the storm gathering both in the sky and in the hearts of Canyon Falls. The tension was so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Faces emerged in every doorway, some pale with dread, others alight with a spark of desperate hope. Jericho Sutherland nudged his horse forward, scanning the rooftops for potential snipers, while Jules Armstrong stood in the middle of the dusty street, bonnet in hand, revealing the silver hair and old war scar that had become her emblem. Lucas Sutherland, arm still in a sling, glowered from his saddle. "I've got a score to settle with that woman," he hissed to Wade Maxwell, who merely shook his head. Wade had seen enough to suspect that tangling with Jules was tantamount to signing one's own death warrant, but Lucas couldn't swallow his wounded pride. He gritted his teeth, half mad with humiliation, eager to rush in and prove to everyone, especially to Jericho, that he wasn't just the younger brother living in the boss's shadow. At an unspoken signal, Jericho Sutherland's men fanned out in a wide arc, preparing to corner Jules. Harriet Neal gripped her shotgun, scanning the rooftops for any sign of an advantage. Carter Milburn and two ranchers slid into the cover of an upturned wagon, rifles braced. Dougie Collins crouched near the boardwalk, fervently hoping his meager training could carry him through the firefight about to erupt. Even Sheriff Crockett, forced to choose a side at last, unholstered his revolver. For a moment, everyone's breath caught in their throats. Then it began. A shot rang out from somewhere behind Sutherland's line, one of his jumpier men spooked by the stifling silence. In the blink of an eye, Jules's guns were in her hands. Her first round found the would-be sniper on a rooftop, sending him sprawling. Her second cracked through the wooden crate where another raider crouched. Gunshots rippled outward in a wave, muzzle flashes lighting the dull morning air. The boom echoed down the single street, reverberating off the rickety storefronts. Lucas Sutherland charged in, ignoring his bad arm. He managed to fire off one shot before Jules spun and returned fire, grazing his thigh. With a strangled yell, he fell from the saddle, rolling in the dust. Carter Milburn's hammering rifle fire kept two of Sutherland's men pinned behind a water trough, while Harriet Neal unleashed her shotgun at another pair foolish enough to rush forward. Deputy Dougie Collins managed to land a shaky shot, wounding a raider in the shoulder. Sutherland himself wheeled his horse around a cluster of crates, fuming that his carefully orchestrated intimidation had devolved into chaos. He spotted Jules' silver hair as she ducked behind a fallen signpost. Lining her up in his sights, he squeezed the trigger. Time seemed to slow, but Jules wasn't there when the bullet passed. She had sprung sideways, returning fire so fast that Sutherland barely avoided a headshot. Splinters of wood exploded near him. Fury contorted his face. Above the din of gunfire, the air pulsed with the shouts of wounded men, the cries of frightened townsfolk, and the thunder of hooves from those trying to find better cover. Rain clouds gathered overhead, deepening the gloom. More of Sutherland's raiders, spooked by the lethal accuracy of Jules and her ragtag defenders, hesitated. Some glanced at their leader, waiting for a decisive call that never came. A few turned tail and bolted into the open desert, unwilling to die for a boss whose iron grip seemed to be slipping. In that swirling melee of dust and gunpowder, an unlikely hero emerged. Sheriff Crockett, perhaps driven by a final stab at redemption, charged into the line of fire, bellowing for Sutherland's men to stand down. "I'm the law in Canyon Falls," he roared, brandishing his revolver. Sweat poured down his temples and his eyes blazed with a mixture of terror and resolve. For a heartbeat, a hush fell, until a rifle barked from Sutherland's side. Crockett's shoulder jerked back, and he stumbled, blood staining his shirt. The hush shattered into renewed gunfire. Seeing the sheriff drop, Dougie Collins risked his neck to drag him behind a supply crate. Harriet Neal fired covering shots, her scattergun thundering. "Don't you dare die on us now," Dougie whispered through clenched teeth as he applied pressure to Crockett's wound. Crockett coughed, staring up at Dougie. In that moment, he managed a shaky grin. "At least, I gotta do something right," he rasped. His eyelids fluttered, and Dougie realized with a jolt that the man might not see the next sunrise. On the other side of the street, Jules Armstrong put her legendary speed to devastating use. Each time a raider popped up, she fired with deadly precision, sending him sprawling. She moved like a dancer, weaving between gunshots. Even Harriet, who had always taken pride in her own no-nonsense grit, watched in awe, grateful that Jules was on their side. Soon the ground was littered with fallen men, some groaning and clutching wounds, others ominously still. Jericho Sutherland realized with cold dread that his force was on the verge of collapse. He spotted Lucas lying in the road, wounded and seething. With a savage oath, Sutherland spurred his horse toward Jules, determined to end this personally. She saw him coming and steadied her aim, but before she could fire, another threat emerged. One of Sutherland's men, a wiry gunman with a face like hammered leather, rose from behind a barrel, taking direct aim at Jules' flank. A shot rang out, and Jules tensed for pain, but none came. Instead, the gunman toppled, a bullet hole punched cleanly through his hat. Stunned, Jules turned to see Harriet Neal lowering her smoking shotgun. Harriet offered a tight nod. "No one's shooting you in the back while I'm around," she said, voice quavering with adrenaline. Jules nodded in silent thanks. Then Sutherland was upon her. His horse thundered across the dirt as he fired rapidly, forcing Jules to dive behind a shattered wagon. He swung off the saddle, landing heavily to charge after her on foot, revolver extended. Jules rolled, kicking up a plume of dust. Sutherland's shot ricocheted off the wagon's metal rim in a shriek of sparks. Shouts from across the street melded into a chorus of fear and gun smoke. Seizing a sliver of opportunity, Jules rose to a knee and fired. Her bullet grazed Sutherland's side, drawing a roar of anger. Staggering, he still managed to level his gun with a snarl. "I've lost men, but you'll lose your life," he hissed, gripping his bleeding flank. Jules prepared to return fire, but Sutherland was already pulling the trigger. Crack! The bullet screamed by her cheek, leaving a burning sensation against her skin. It might have hit her had Harriet not lobbed a half-broken chair into Sutherland's line of sight, disrupting his aim. The chair splintered on impact, and Sutherland stumbled. That single instant was all Jules needed. She pivoted, firing once, twice. Sutherland's revolver dropped from his hand as he sank to his knees, coughing blood into the dust. A hush fell over the street. The few remaining raiders either threw down their guns or bolted out of Canyon Falls entirely. Rain began to patter, mingling with the drifting haze of gun smoke. Harriet Neal, Dougie Collins, and Carter Milburn emerged cautiously from cover, scanning for any lingering threats. By the Golden Bell Saloon, a cluster of townspeople huddled, faces etched with terror and astonishment. For years they had lived beneath Jericho Sutherland's boot. Now that tyranny lay sprawled in the dirt, gasping for breath. Jules approached him slowly, holstering one revolver but keeping the other leveled. Sutherland glared up at her, blood staining his shirt, fury burning in his eyes despite his dire state. "This changes nothing," he rasped. "I have connections, powers beyond this town. I'll be back." Jules's jaw tightened. "Not this time," she replied, her voice calm but laden with finality. From the sidelines, Harriet Neal stepped forward, her shotgun cradled in both arms. "We've got enough evidence and eyewitness accounts to bury you for good," she said, voice quivering with contained emotion. Dougie Collins, shaky though he was, nodded. "We'll lock you up, and if the federal marshal doesn't do his job, I'm sure the folks here will figure out another way." Sutherland's gaze darted around, searching for any loyal men who might rescue him. None remained. Lucas lay unconscious from his wounds. Wade Maxwell was nowhere to be seen, likely fled the moment the fight turned against them. Two of the black-clad gunmen whimpered in pain near the boardwalk, their injuries too severe to allow them to flee. Suddenly, Dougie gasped, remembering the sheriff. He ran to where Crockett lay behind the crate, Harriet hot on his heels. They found the man unconscious, blood pooling around his shoulder. Dr. Morgan might have been able to save him, but Morgan was gone, presumably spirited off to safety by that same elusive ally who had rescued the Reynolds children. Harriet tore strips of cloth for bandages, and Dougie did what he could to staunch the bleeding, but Crockett's face was ashen. "I'm sorry," Dougie whispered, though whether it was to Crockett or to himself was unclear. Back at the center of town, Jules knelt beside Sutherland, hooking his wrists together with a length of rope. Each loop felt like the closing of a chapter in Canyon Falls' long nightmare. The rain fell harder, washing rivulets of blood into the thirsty ground. "It's over," she announced, rising to face the few remaining raiders. "If you want to survive, drop your weapons and help take care of the wounded." Slowly, one by one, they complied, the will to fight drained from them. The storm grew heavier, as though the sky itself wept for the fallen. Townspeople emerged from hiding places to gather up the wounded, both friend and foe. Carter Milburn organized a triage station in Harriet's store. Dougie managed to carry Crockett into the store as well, though no one was sure if the sheriff would survive the night. Meanwhile, Harriet began collecting names of the injured, marking who needed immediate help and who could wait. Jules, for her part, walked the length of the street, helping pull injured men clear of the downpour and offering what meager medical skills she possessed. In the aftermath, as the downpour hammered the roof of the Golden Bell and the streets grew thick with mud, Canyon Falls found itself poised at a fragile turning point. Sutherland's reign of terror was finished, but the cost had been high. Lives lost, buildings pocked with bullet holes, and a shaken population that wondered how to move forward. Eyes flicked to Jules for guidance. This was, after all, the day she had promised to stand between tyranny and innocence, and she had delivered. The days following Jericho Sutherland's downfall felt both surreal and liberating for the townsfolk of Canyon Falls. Bullet holes scarred storefronts, rooftops needed repair, and a few battered souls mourned lost loved ones. Yet an undercurrent of renewal pulsed through the community. Folks no longer skulked about with eyes on the ground. They walked upright, exchanging determined nods as they tended to rubble and ruin. Harriet Neal's store became the heart of relief efforts. Clothes, food, and supplies passed through its door for both victims of the shootout and the repentant raiders who had thrown down their arms. Sutherland, meanwhile, languished in the drafty jail, which had a single barred cell. With Sheriff Crockett gravely wounded, Dougie Collins had assumed the role of acting lawman. His posture was stiff with uncertainty, but he tackled the job with a conscience unburdened by bribes. Harriet Neal, Carter Milburn, and several volunteer guards made sure Sutherland stayed put. Though he spat threats of retribution, few believed him anymore. The telegraph lines crackled with messages to federal marshals, documenting each horrific detail of his crimes. In hushed undertones, people spoke of a formal trial or an official inquiry. What of Jules Armstrong? The woman many now whispered was the legendary phantom of wartime lore. She showed no interest in acclaim or leadership. Instead, she spent much of her time helping bury the dead, consoling grieving families, and offering a steady hand with the physical labor of rebuilding. Harriet found her one late afternoon, quietly boarding up the shattered windows of the Golden Bell. "You don't have to do all this alone," Harriet said softly, handing Jules a fresh hammer. Jules paused, sweat glistening on her brow. "I'm not alone, Harriet. Look around." Indeed, a motley group of citizens was working side by side. Ex-raiders carrying lumber, ranchers mixing mortar, townsfolk scrubbing away soot. It was as though the battle had melted the barriers that once separated them. A sense of camaraderie permeated the dusty air. Harriet recognized how Jules's quiet presence had galvanized them, offering a glimpse of what unity could accomplish. They made progress each day. The battered facades began looking less like remnants of a war zone. Children chased each other in the street without flinching at every noise. Dr. Morgan, once presumed missing, reappeared after a few days, explaining he'd been whisked away by friends who wanted to keep him safe from Sutherland's wrath. He returned to find a queue of wounded men and grateful families, and he dove into his work with renewed vigor. Sheriff Crockett hung on by a thread, drifting in and out of consciousness, while Dougie Collins handled official duties. When Crockett managed to speak, he begged Dougie's forgiveness for letting the town down. Dougie pressed his hand gently, saying, "We all make mistakes, some bigger than others, but you tried to set it right in the end. I'm grateful for that." Whether Crockett heard him or not was unclear, but a faint smile creased the sheriff's face before he slipped into sleep again. By the time a couple of uniformed marshals arrived from the territorial capital, they found a town in transition. Sutherland was ready for transport to a formal jail, his left arm still bandaged from Jules's bullet. A handful of his more vicious allies had either fled or been locked up. The marshals, faces lined with the experience of chasing outlaws across the frontier, commended Dougie for his thorough documentation. Harriet Neal produced testimonies from at least 20 witnesses, each detailing Sutherland's extortion, murders, and kidnappings. The evidence was overwhelming. As the marshals prepared to lead Sutherland away in shackles, he fixed a bitter glare on Jules. "Someday I'll find a way out," he snarled. Jules met his gaze with a steady, unblinking calm. "If you do, don't come back here," she replied, turning away. With that, Sutherland was taken from Canyon Falls, leaving behind only the smoldering remnants of his twisted empire. And there, beneath the merciless desert sun, the people of Canyon Falls finally exhaled a collective breath they'd held for too long. The silhouette of Jules Armstrong, silver hair catching the midday light, stood as a testament to how a single spark of defiance could burn down the tallest walls of tyranny. Although no one could say what future challenges might arise, the town had learned a powerful lesson. When good people stand together, even the mightiest oppressor can be brought to heel. Looking back at the dust and desperation, it's astonishing how one person's spark of bravery transformed an entire town's fate. From trembling under an outlaw's iron grip to discovering they had the strength to stand together, These folks learned that hope is often found in the unlikeliest places. Today, Canyon Falls stands as a beacon of resilience, where friendships were forged in fire and faith in humanity overcame the weight of corruption. I hope you found this story every bit as inspiring as I did. Sometimes it takes a fierce storm to make us appreciate the calm after the clouds part. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Did you see the twist coming, or were you surprised by the ending? Share your own takes on justice, redemption, or any insights that caught your attention. Thanks for joining this journey, and keep riding with us for more tales worth telling.